So this is really my perspective and a farmer's perspective as a Karoo farmer living and working in the Karoo on a wildlife reserve, and a perspective that we want to share with people, and to say that you know, you can co-regenerate, you can work together with wildlife, with livestock, if you plan it properly and if you do understand language, the language of nature. So it's quite interesting, and I'll take you through a few slides. I'll share with you guys a bit of background, give you an overview of the property and how we do things here. But then it's important to talk about a few principles, because without the principles, you can look at the tools that we apply in different contexts, and you won't really understand why we do certain things. So I would really urge people to not to cherry pick the things that they like, and the things that they see that they can copy and paste and think they can do themselves. The one thing that we don't do at the Herding Academy is really tell people how to farm and what to do. We don't do that. We try to explain the principles and how we apply them in our context. So this is purely the context, and I would like to share that with everyone. So yes, the easy question: where do you want to see yourself? And I think the farm is like, you know, it's the landscape of anyone's farm is a farmer's portrait of himself. So how do you really envision your future farm to look like, and or your future landscape to look like? And I mean, it could be easy, it could be there or here. And what's really happening, what's really scary in going around in the world, is that we are entering in the 6th extinction period. We're losing 50,000 species annually. The rate of extinction is what happened 65 million years ago. An interesting thing here where I am in Graaff-Reinet is sort of the origin of all mammalian life on Earth. And it's fascinating to see in the layers of these mountains and the stories being told, that we are currently seeing massive change due to climate change, obviously. Most die as a result of human activity and pollution. You know, these are all realities that we're facing with. Drought is inevitable, and we know drought. As Karoo farmers, we came with, you know, we know drought, and we definitely know that drought occurs every 7 to 8 years throughout history. So taking it a bit slower, to give you a bit of overview on the property, we're sitting with Southern Karoo Riviera, about 20% of that. Coexist Boerskaap and Thicket, about 30% of that. Upper Karoo Harderveld, 10%, Eastern Upper Karoo Veld, 20%. Karoo Skaap and Grassland, about 20%. And the interesting thing is that the property really gives itself so much diversity in species. And the Coexist Boerskaap and Thicket, the one that you see there in the middle is 30%, is the reason why we're trying to protect this part of the Karoo. That is diminishing at the alarming rate as we speak. So obviously heavily overstocked during the wool boom, 60s to 70s, the soil erosion works, fences, subsidies by government happened. And you can see that all over this part of the Karoo. The interesting fact is that the Karoo, the Pepa Dam that we have at Graaff-Reinet, that's by the water to town, is currently 45% salted up, of which 60% of that salt actually originated from the wool boom as a cause of overgrazing. 70s to 90s, the government stocking rates were applied because of the damage that was occurring in the Karoo. Then we acquired the farm end of the 80s, beginning of the early 80s, to protect that Karoo habitat. Obviously, like we all do, we acquire property, you appoint conservationists, and they give you sort of an analysis of what they think it should happen on the property. And then as a consequence of that, it was literally killed with kindness and pure intentions. You know, never has any farm, I think, the damage is felt because intentionally it is all done unintended. So conventionally, obviously what happened was conventionality. You know what happens normally in a nature reserve? You acquire the land which was past used for agricultural purposes or livestock. Firstly, you destock the animals off the land, then you fence it, and then you restock it with wildlife, which is all three cardinal mistakes. I think if I could ever do it again, I would look at it totally differently. So conventionally, that is normally what would have happened. You destock livestock at cost because you lose quite a bit of capital there. You break down the infrastructure and at cost. You restock the wildlife at cost. Constant grazing happens then at cost because you've implemented and you restocked it with wildlife, which as a constant grazing, which cannot migrate. So that was, and I'll get to that just now, because you get constant grazing, and this is a typical situation where all our national parks and all our private game reserves sits in, because there's no fences, there's no time control, and you literally get overgrazing, not because there's too many animals. It's actually just spending too much time on the same land. So the absence of the herd effect at cost, and that happens when you don't have predators and pack hunting predators specifically. Overresting and overgrazing at cost, decreasing cover cost, and the loss of biodiversity at cost. And those are the things that just happen naturally, and this is occurring really throughout the world in all protected environments and in all conservation areas. So it was a bit of a shock when I got to the property and I saw the degradation, and it's not only on the properties. A lot of the degradation happened around us in the national park, the properties around us. And the real question is, how can you solve this? We all know that if you don't have cover, if you don't have biodiversity, you've got less water efficiency, also cost. Now you start bringing in external capital and energy to use, to apply rehabilitation projects, all that more cost. Doing the same thing over and over again, and this economics of conservation. So at the end of the day, you're starting to solve problems that you could have sort of right in the beginning, if we understood the principles and how it's functioning at the moment. So the major extraction of energy happened, and we try to address that by bringing in energy at massive cost from outside, all fossil-based energy. To understand, sort of trying to explain to you how we operate, I think we focus mainly on 4 legs and 4 very important pillars that we stand on. Firstly, I think you've got to understand the brittleness scale. This is something that sort of opened my eyes as a farmer, as to understand the spread of humidity throughout the year and why does your ecosystem function in different ways. It's a very easy concept. The concept of brittleness is it's not rain dependent, so it doesn't really matter. It's not the indication of how much rain you get, but the spread of humidity throughout the season. For instance, Joburg gets about 700 millimeters per year, but it gets it in 3 to 4 months. And then you have, and then you get London, which also gets 700 millimeters of rain, but it gets it about 2 millimeters per day. And that's the non-brittle environment, whereas we in the Karoo sits at the brittleness scale of around 6, probably 7, which means that we've got only a few months of growing season. And the question is, how do you actually manage that to bridge the other months of the year, which we don't have any growth in the veld? So it is quite interesting that the one is animal dependent, whereas if you go to the 0 on the brittleness scale, for instance, in a rainforest, it's mainly insect and small mammals and small animal dependent. Whereas the more brittle you go, the more it becomes herbivore dependent. And herbivores never stayed in that same area because of that reason. Because there was only growth for a few months, they tend to move. Current situation is we're sort of forcing the animals to stay. There's fences, they stay in one area, and how do we manage that? So when you start understanding the brittleness effect and the brittleness scale, then you can start making certain decisions on them. The second thing is that, okay, so the landscape I realized was animal dependent. You cannot take animals off the land and rest land in the Karoo and think it's going to return to where it should be. It's not. It just goes backward. It needs animal feet. It needs trampling. It needs grazing. So what we try to do is to mimic the herbivore migrations, and we did that through introducing livestock to the property. So, and then again, also use what and when nature gives us for free. We know we get sunlight for free. We know we get water for free. We're adding land to that. And how do you manage the land, and how do you manage really for what nature gives you for free? It's important. So the next thing is the role of animals. So the role of animals, because we're in a brittle environment, is quite important. Mimic the herd effect by managing the domestic animals became pertinent because you had to exercise time control and then also hoof effect, because what a herd actually does, and the trampling effect that the herd has with its hoof, and that is caused normally by predator and by pack hunting predators in the environment, is quite important. Now, you can't leave animals to just graze on open field. What happens then is they start moving in between these shrubs and bushes, and they just clear these poles, like you see all over the Karoo. It's bare between the plants, there's no cover, and it really just degrades backward. So you need to understand the role of animals and what function that animal actually has to play, and cover bare soil with animal impact. Prepare seedbed with a hoof effect, mulch organic material through the herd effect, and apply animals to create an ideal environment. So that is, and I'll touch on the grazing planning and how we actually get to plan around an open property in a reserve context. I'll get to that just now. This is really only to explain to you some of the principles that we apply. Time control. So how do you apply time control in an open reserve in a conservation context? It's very difficult. If the animals can't migrate, if the animals is there constantly on the same land, if you don't have any predators, it's a challenge on its own, and we'll talk you through that a bit. But again, the time management is crucial as to when to rest and when to disturb your soil, when to rest and when to disturb your plants, how much recovery time you've got to give your plants to grow and recover. And then different felt types need different animals, and different animals need felt, but not always at the same time or at the same numbers. And you often find in conservation areas where you have overgrazing and over resting, and plants going dormant in the same area. And that's an indication of time management, animal numbers. Yeah, so really the question is, do we need to spend time in doing good or doing bad? And very few times people actually realize that they're doing bad. So time control in a brittle environment is absolutely crucial, and we'll get to that a bit later in the slide. The more time we spend in nature, the better we understand. I think it's a concept where the more time anyone spends in nature, and we know you earlier referred to the connectivity of people, that connection that you have with nature, and I think these things really speak to you when you spend a lot of time in nature. Holism, and then obviously you understand holism, and I often try to explain it very simply to people, is that we cannot assume that our actions have no effect on your neighbor, the community, and the environment, even globally. The earth is round for a reason, and that's the saying, what goes around comes around. Treat yourself and your family and community as if you're part of the earth that you walk on. And remember that we're all part of nature and living in the same planet. So holism is really the crucial part where everything turns around. And this is also probably our biggest challenge, especially from science side, is really to monitor, to record, to really do research on holism, and the effect that everything has on itself is just, all other things, is almost impossible. So that's quite challenging. And then, so what we did realize is that conservation as a tool or as an instrument is not sustainable. understanding the language of nature for us is much more important. My headers just really came up with the concept of the language of nature. You know, for them, it's really spending time in nature and understanding the language of nature. You understand how she speaks and how she reacts to certain practices. So what we're trying to do is create a long-term vision. How should the landscape look like? Picture that for yourself, and then you start focusing your decision-making around how you see your future landscape to look like. And then develop your context around that. So that's very important, and I specifically bring this in because without a context, you can't really align your decisions, your day-to-day decisions. Context is really speaking about your vision, speaking about how you see your future landscape. For us, our future landscape is to create an ecology with a conscious working environment, provide employment and strive in perpetuity. So the financial aspects to this and really making a living out of this and supporting the community is very important. Enhance ecological processes, reduce energy consumption, building soil health and biodiversity, reducing CO2 emissions, creating ecological literacy, improvement, purpose of quality of life and happiness, constantly growing your holistic decision-making framework through monitoring and measurement, create value-based sustainable business models, share experiences and lead by example. I'm really running through these things because it is really important that you understand what our context is before we go further and why I apply certain tools in our context. So I really need to run through this. So what happened as a result of that? We said, right, we want to keep a big part of the property open as a reserve, as a wildlife reserve only, no fences, the animals roam free, and that's how we do it. Another part of the property, we said, right, let's do wildlife breeding on that side, but we apply the same principles within that context. And then there's a third part of the property where we have livestock as a production unit. It's also an inclusive employers company where they all have shares in. And if you look at this now, you'll start to understand that there's three different contexts, and we apply the principles in all three. So if people visit us, I can really show them how we apply within the wildlife context, how we apply the principles, also within the game ranching context, as well as in the livestock environment in the Karoo. So let's get to the resources. We have that thing that comes up every morning in the east, and that is absolutely for free. We know our rain is for free. We know the land is scarce and getting scarcer. We know the infrastructure is expensive, animals are expensive, and we know humans are very complex. And the interesting thing is that we decide to put our energy and our money in the most expensive and most complex scenarios instead of putting it to add value in those things that we actually get for free. So we'll get to that just now. So solar, just go to the way that we see things. We all solar farmers. That's how we would like to see ourselves. So the longer you can keep your plants healthy, for greener for longer, the more carbon you cycle from the more CO2 you can take out of the air and put that as sugars and as carbon into the soil. So that's what we like to think we are, and the more efficient you can obviously do that, the better for your farm and for your value chain. So how much do we get? We get about 300 billion kilowatt hours. That's the amount of solar energy that we're getting. How much do we use? Unfortunately, very little of that do we use, because we're in a brittle environment. You only have green growing leaves for a few months of the year, and we need to capitalize on that as much as we can. How can we make it more efficient? Increase the cover, keeping the plants greener for longer. Okay, and that's an example of how we can do it. This is a quick example of one night crawling, where we used 1,000 sheep in a mobile crawl. We never crawl more than 2 nights at a place. It depends on how much bare soil there is, and how much and how much erosion and all sorts of things. This is really an example of what happened, how it looked like before, and then what happened during the process. Unfortunately, the cover that we created also went moribund, and that is purely because I didn't have enough animals to get back to that land in the right time. So that's another problem that and it's a good problem maybe to have. But that is just the effect that you can have with one night trawling on an eroded area. You'll see in the center picture at the bottom there that just the top part of that picture, you can see the erosion there that historically looks like that. And that area is fully covered at the moment. Rain, how much do we get? 300 to 50 millimeters average. We're in the Karoo, we're in a very brittle area. We don't often get this type of rain, but we on average about 300 to 50 millimeters. We just came out of a 7-year drought. We're sort of in our 2nd year of getting rain, but if you really look at the amount of water that falls on a 30,000 hectare property, it is massive amount of water. The question is not how much do we get, it's actually how much do we keep, how much do we lose. And unfortunately, with a cover in the Karoo, I mean, very few Karoo farms land due to all sorts of historical reasons. And yes, so unfortunately, we don't keep a lot of our water in the Karoo on the land. We all know that the topsoil is the biggest freshwater reservoir on earth, but if your topsoil is bare, if it's compacted, there's no ways you can keep water in there. And you're also losing carbon in the process, unfortunately. So that's quite a big loss. So our main focus here is actually to increase the cover, stop the drop, increase the ground cover and stop where the water falls, keep it there. For every 1 gram of increase in soil organic matter, increase water retention by 5%, and then physically grow more plants per square meter. That's very simple. It's a very simple target to achieve, and we use livestock to assist us in doing that. This is another example of how you can prevent water from evaporating from dry cat soil. This is handmade pondings, and that is just the sequence of what happens if you cover it with acacia branches. No seeding, absolutely no seeding. That is how nature covered it. The same project back there in time with animals, with enough early effect, so the grasses went moribund again. But there is enough cover. If you trample that with a herd of sheep or cattle now, then you'll have a proper mulch and a proper cover for the next raining season. This is another example where we use the tool, just a little plow. You can just see the top left-hand picture where after a rainfall, none of that water went into the soil. It stood on top of it, it evaporated. The soil is bare, couldn't keep the moisture in. And the bottom right-hand picture, it's just an example of a ponding that we do with a little plow. No seeds again, just covered it, and that is the effect that we had. Currently, that area is almost 80% covered, which means 80% cover. And this is horse paddocks, and you know, generally horses are very, very heavy on land, especially in the Karoo where there's no irrigation. We don't irrigate those lands, those are dry lands. It has an amazing effect if you can just cover your land and give nature a tiny bit of opportunity to recover itself. It actually astonishes once. Yeah, so it's a thing to see the change. So this is what we have. Covered and healthy, about 60% is healthy, so it's equals to about 18,000 hectares. Unfortunately, 12,000 hectares is lost due to bare soil. If you can cover that, it's almost, you know, it's interesting because if people want to expand their farming, they normally look at more land adjacent to them or want to expand horizontally. Expanding vertically by planting 1 more plant per square meter, you can add another few thousand hectares on top of your current farm. And that's the power of animals and applying animals to do that for you. How can we make it more efficient? Increase the cover, keep the plants growing for longer. Vertical value adding, this is horizontal value adding, and increase soil carbon. This is just an example. I need to show you. So one of the tools that we're applying is the NDVI satellite imagery. The red is exposed land and really reflects heat, bare soil. But the interesting thing about this picture, there's 10 years apart. The left hand was taken in 2009 and the right hand was taken in 2019. Now, 2019 was the end of the driest period in human history in the Karoo, compared to the 2009, which was the end of one of the wettest seasons we ever had in the Karoo. Within those 10 years difference, we almost went from a lot of bare soil that you can see there, on the red and exposed soil, to almost fully covered into 2019. And the question really is, what did we change in between? And the answer is that we've started applying livestock in the wildlife context to actually mulch the plants, to put vegetation and to put the organic matter on the soil, make it available for the microbes to get into the soil. Increasing our water retention, increasing our biodiversity. And that is really what happened. I can't pinpoint it to a specific task, but I think often say to people, it's just understanding or trying to understand what nature wants and then just act on that. And this is the results. And we could never have expected that. In fact, when we started applying the herd effect, I was quite not very optimistic about it, and I thought it will take us years, 5 years, 10 years maybe to see the change. We started seeing change in the worst time in drought in 2017, within 3 months since we applied the herd effect in areas. So it had an amazing effect, and much faster than we could anticipate. This is another example. This is the current LSUs, and it is quite interesting to see how quickly that has dropped to August this year. We'll be back at 12. The normal LSUs for this region is about 14. We haven't had very much rain yet for the season. Our season is still starting, but it just shows you that the cover, and especially from the previous season, the way that we've covered the soil is actually having a massive effect all over the property. The right-hand picture that you see there sort of referred to 7 grams of dry material or grass, edible plants, any grass, any plant edible. So for every 7, in the average Karoo farm of 5,000 hectares, if you can grow 7 grams per square meter extra, you save every year 2.5 million rand on your powerful these scenes. This is another example. So the far left-hand picture is grazing, is constant grazing. That's the Coexist National Park. Sorry, I've been getting messages on this now. That's taken south towards Swartfrenet. It's in the Coexist National Park. You see the effect of constant grazing on that same spot. Turned around, took a picture to the north onto this property, and the only difference really between those two properties, we both have constant grazing, we both have wildlife, and the only difference between those two pictures is that we applied the herd effect. We brought in herds of sheep, and they trampled the veld. Push some of the wildlife out of that area for short time, for periods, and that was the effect. On the third picture, there's the use of fences, which we use in the wildlife sort of breeding area. Again, the same effect. Much better cover, a lot more green grass. Unfortunately, again, not enough animals to utilize all of the grass, so some of the grass has been moribund. It's now just to trample that, and that's really where you want to be. This is another picture of one of the tools that we apply. We call it bale grazing. In the drought, we had a few bare areas, bare soil, where we put bales down, and we use the animals and the wildlife to trample those bales, to eat it, and then to trample it into urine and put their dung on those soils. And this was just the picture taken probably about 4 months after that. And you can just see it's an amazing cover. All of a sudden, there's a diversity that we don't really understand yet. some of the areas with moles coming in, there's termites moving into those areas, cycling that carbon, cycling that organic material that's on the top layer. Quite interesting. Another tool is infrastructure. So this is the production farm where we went from when we acquired the property, it had about 20% cover on it. It was in a really bad state. It could carry 1,000 sheep. It was a production farm, very conventional, 6-camp system. It could carry 1,000 sheep. With the principles and the knowledge that we've then acquired, we went and increased these camps from 6 camps to 36 camps. I doubled up the stocking rate. I went from 1,000 sheep to 2,000 sheep. Remember, it's still a production farm. And the cover increased from 20% to 80% within 6 months. And that was quite astonishing to see that. So now that the cover is there, now we can start working on the biodiversity. So, you know, for us, our context is really to increase the cover and then to increase the biodiversity. And on top of biodiversity, you can start adding your species compositions. For us, that farm is an amazing example of what you can achieve through planned grazing and through holistic management, understanding the principles, giving enough time for recover, but also giving enough impact so you can create the mulch and you can unblock that carbon block that you often get in the veld. 2 more examples. So the picture on the left-hand side I took recently in the Oudtshoorn area, and this is just time control. It's the only difference between these two, where you've got animals constantly on the same land, typical what happens in our reserves and game reserves. And on the right-hand side, it's also wildlife. We breed wildlife. There's a herd of buffalo there, enough time control, and that is what you can achieve, keeping your plants greener for longer, with a lot more animals on there. So it's quite astonishing to see this. This is another tool that we apply on top of a mountain. This is Suurveld, that we like to call it. It's not good grazing country, and what we do is we crawl every night. We crawl our sheep due to predation and for other reasons as well. But and then also working on the left-hand picture, you can see the erosion in that area. So that is really what we're trying to solve. And I'll show you some of the results of just in a while. It's just to give you an example of the crawling effect and the tools that's 1,000 sheep in one kraal, and one of those kraals are about 30 meters in the ocean. So it's not a very big setup. It's another portion of the property where we run a herd of buffalo to do exactly the same thing, applying the same principles by using a herd of buffalo. I think it's the only place in the world where we use wild buffalo to apply holistic planned grazing within a wildlife context, which is quite interesting. And that, just to get back to that picture, that part of the property runs at about 60% less overhead cost than another buffalo herd that we have in the open reserve. So it's very interesting then if you have the opportunity to really plan and design a property, or if you don't have a property, to design it by imaginary camps, and you run your flocks on there, that you decrease your overheads tremendously if you do it through planned grazing. This is another tool which we apply. This is electric fencing. You can do it in a very simpler way than this. If your camps are too big, you don't have to have massive expenses and capital expenses to split it in smaller units. If you don't have enough animals, you simply apply electric fencing to it. That's another example. Very interesting concept that we have here. The herd. I've got 2 herders, professional herders, trained herders that work on a flock of 1,000 sheep. The model really works that one guy is on 24 hours for a week constantly. So they work night and day. At night they're with the sheep, look after them, see that there's no predation. And during the day, takes the sheep out within an imaginary camp. So this is the tool really that we apply in the reserve side of things, where there's no fences. The reserve is divided up in imaginary camps, and we really design our grazing plan according to that. And these the kraals are mobile, the accommodation is mobile, the water even is mobile. If you're going to areas where there's no water, everything moves with them. But need to understand that the context here is really to have the trampling effect and to have that herd effect on the veld. So production is not our prime focus here. We do go for production certain times of the year. When it's lambing, we move to other areas which is fenced, where we lamb off and then return back to the open reserve at a later time. So it also gives you opportunity really to bring herds in and take them out, destock and stock over different periods of time. So the infrastructure is really enable you to get into areas of a property which is not fenced, and this is something that's really valuable in the rest of Southern Africa, where there's no fences. They make use of kraals to really go into places where there's predators, and even often when we go into areas where there's no water, now you actually make it accessible, and not to crawl every night in the same place, coming back home and crawl in the same place. So this really is a way to regenerate landscapes, to rehabilitate old erosion areas, just by mimicking that herd effect. This is an example of one of Alan Savory's kraals up in Zimbabwe. This is where they have these animals are crawled within lion areas. They stay for a few days longer because it's quite the effort to put up those kraals. It just shows you what you have available in your toolbox to if you're in those areas and what can be achieved. This is an example of just another tool that we're measuring, water infiltration. Directly correlates with ground cover, and also another very useful tool is if you start measuring your groundwater, you can see how your groundwater recovers and how much more stable it is over the years since we've increased our ground cover. It's quite interesting to see those, the effect. And the role of animals is really to keep your plants healthy for longer. So all of us know the S-curve, the sigmoid curve of a plant, and we're really trying to keep plants in a phase 2 where you create more growth, you create green leaves for the purpose of cycling carbon, and creating more growth. That's basically what we're trying to do, and then trampling that with the sheep from time to time, and then really long resting periods. All depends on our grazing plans. We come back and we monitor an area. We look at the land to see how much stock days that piece of land can give us. We apply the animals, and a few months later we come back and reassess that piece of land and see how much more, how much less animal impact we can have. So we're sort of in a situation where we more or less know the stock days that we can take off in certain areas. And obviously the stock days becomes a measurable tool where you can see if you increase biodiversity, if you increase your cover, then your stock days increases as well. And that is currently becoming sort of a guideline for us to measure ourselves against. Herd effect, just by trampling and mulching the cover, feeding the soil and its food web, increase the soil organic matter, breaking the cap soil. And then also we'll get to bale grazing as a tool as well, spreading microbes and fertilizer. So many people, if I get back to bale grazing, so many people in the drier times feed the animals and it's constantly feeding them on the same spot. We've seen the change just by moving your feed bins, just by moving those areas once a week. It doesn't even have to be once a week. It could be less, it could be more. But by moving them, you're already creating another effect, and a roof effect in the veld. It's also interesting. You can do the same thing with lick. You can do the same thing with water. It's just applying those principles is the main thing. Not to do it in the same area, every year on year. So there's another kraal that's a post-kraal site. You've seen that other picture, the previous picture where we had the animals crawling in that seed veld. this is a good example of what happened afterwards. So you can see the gray around that, those round spots, that's the seed felt, and we had a total species change. Now this was not intended. This was a consequence of high density trampling and one night crawl. They sleep and they dung the urine on the same spot. And it's amazing that those round circles where we crawl them, and we don't crawl, I mean, that took us about 4 or 5 days crawling nights that we crawled there. That has totally changed into a sweet felt species and not sour felt anymore. The question now and the challenge now is to actually return to that areas in time. So yeah, it actually trend positive and not going backward again. So the herd effect, this is just an example. So exactly what you get in nature, as soon as you have a herd of buffalo or a herd of springbok or anything else, and you've got pack hunting animals approaching, they start turning in a circle, and that is what we like to refer to as the herd effect, the trampling effect. And you can see on the left-hand picture that we're mimicking the same thing by one herder in that flock. There's about 1,000 sheep in that flock, and he's got a dog there with him that helps him to do that. Now you don't do that, don't do that consistently. The same as in the wild, you mimic it once or twice or 3 times a day, depends on where you want to work. Otherwise, you're going to compromise animal performance with that. Another example of a before and after crawling site. Quite interesting, and the effect is just amazing. It's only a one night crawl. There's a lot of mulch on that land, and that was what happened. Bale grazing. There's another bale grazing site. Absolutely crazy what happens. This is a site in Zimbabwe, and just coming back to your crawling sites, what happened here on the picture with the maize is that the guys just crawled on the other side. There was a fence between those two guys, and they crawled on one night, and the other side where this poor chap is standing has never been crawled really. And that was just the effect that they had. Now, obviously, what is currently happening throughout Southern Africa, the guys bring the animals in, they crawl in the same place every night, and rather take the manure to the vegetable patches instead of just using the crawl effect to create this. The same with the soil. The soil samples was taken right there. The one was from the crawl site, and the one was from the site next to it, which hasn't been crawled. You can just see the difference in that. This is a little video. Let me see if I can play it. A little time lapse, which I want to share with you guys. In the Karoo, and you can see the amount of bare soil there when we started, and you can just follow how it actually changes through the season. Very interesting to see it. Unfortunately, we didn't see the animals being used here, but they've been through this area at least twice during that season. You just see how that increase in that cover has increased and the bare soil has decreased. So what is challenging at this time is that you actually need animals to use that grass and trample that back onto the soil to prevent it from getting bare again, because the microbes can't really reach plants if they're that high. You know, microbes can only use them when they're flatten on the ground. You actually need animals to do that for you. I think that's part of the reason why our nature reserves is not really functioning as it should be, because there's very little animal impact in those felts and very little rest periods. Another example of high animal impact, this is really where you want to be on the right-hand side after a season. You wanted to use the grass and not have it going moribund and dormant, like on the left-hand side of the fence. Another area of bale grazing, so we took bale grazing to a totally different scale it up massively. So we saw what one bale could do in a bare patch in the veld, and what how the wildlife actually processed that, and it was absorbed in the veld and creating a nice cover. And we said, right, let's take these big erosion areas, these historic bare soil, and let's do it at scale. And the left-hand side was just after we've cleaned it, we've reshaped it, reshaped a lot of that erosion as to rehydrate it, you know, just shape the landscape again as it was. And yeah, and the right-hand picture was actually taken this morning, and you can see the cover. Unfortunately, I didn't have this picture of before. It was really big. There was really massive dongas and massive erosion there. And it's really historical, old, overgrazed areas. It's also in this flatter, sweeter areas of the property. You can see the massive difference, and that's only by using old bales, not fresh cut bales. Now, obviously, you don't have to bring this in. It's expensive exercise. By just using a flock of animals, moving the feeding areas, you can have exactly the same effect. You know, meter by meter, hectare by hectare. You can really start small. You can start with a little patch of chickens if you like, and really start small. And this is another picture, another example of it. Left-hand side where we did massive bale grazing. You'll see the little dots there, at the bottom, the bales that we've packed out, and the cover that we have on the right-hand side that we created after that. Yeah, so it's quite a challenge to now keep it like that, and obviously using the animals, applying the animals, and resting it for long enough. Then we had, yeah, for the last 2 years, we had locusts, massive amount of locusts all over the property. For us, it is part of the animals. We see it as a massive nutritionist bomb that gets onto the property. Normally, when the locust hatches, and so by the way, they only hatch on bare soil. If you don't have bare soil, we probably won't have locust outbreaks. That only happens after a drought, where we unfortunately have a lot of bare soil, and there's very little biological predators. There's very little birds. There's very little insects. So after a drought, normally when we get our first rain, we will have a breakout of locusts, and you never have enough animals that time of the year, because you just destocked. You don't have enough animals. You've got massive growth in the veld. You get a swarm of locusts, and all the locust does is actually cycling that biomass and cycling all that growth back into the soil, which you would have done with animals anyway. So the interesting fact is that we've analyzed the dung. You can see that it's quite high and quite nutritious, and there was literally thousands and thousands of tons of locust dung scattered all over the area. And also the interesting fact is that we saw that areas that's been hit by locusts has recovered a lot faster than areas which hasn't had locust on it. So something is happening there which we can't explain. It's part of the complexity of nature. But what we do know is that the picture on top right was taken 4 months after the locust has been sprayed. And you can see they were still dead. Nothing ate them. The soil is sterile. It hasn't been absorbed by any microbes taken into the soil. The soil is dead. Soil life is dead. Animals who ate those locusts within the 5 days died. I mean, we got bakuriakos. We saw them all over. Black-footed cats, birds that ate them in that 5-day period, and unfortunately there was massive losses from that. So again, you've got to look at the problem, or to see where if it is a threat to your farming operation, you've got to treat it at its most vulnerable stage, and that is purely up to your own context, is where you want to do that in the life cycle of that locust. We believe that we're trying hard to cover the soil. If we can cover the soil, you'll have a lot less breakouts of locusts. Unfortunately, what is happening as soon as you start spraying, you know, not only kill locusts, you kill your whole ecological cycle, which creates more bare soil and more opportunity for locusts to hatch, unfortunately. Right, but let's step off that. We'll look at, yeah, this is some of the locust scattings that we got. And you can see this little line was washed by the rain. So the rain, it formed a little dam wall almost there, catching the water. And all of a sudden you get these the ants working it into the soil. It's just absolutely amazing, the mulch and the nutritional value that we got from this. Look at the cover around those plants where you had the locust cat. Another picture and an example of ponding. This is obviously quite expensive to do, but you know, if you look at the cost of ponding and we've got quite a social responsibility towards employing people, and the value that you're adding through this, if I can add, you know, another 20% of cover on the land over time, that equals almost another property that you vertically add to the current property, and that's how powerful it really gets. So yes, it is costly, but if you manage it properly, you will add a lot of value on the land. Another example is just stocking rates. So managing stocking rates in line with rainfall, carrying capacity. It's very interesting to see species by species how we do that, and it's just another way that we manage time control, we manage hoof impact, we manage animal control on the different felt types that we have. This is an example of NDVI differences through, this is since 2021 to November to 2021. And it just shows you how it differs. But the interesting thing with this is that the orange line represents the government stocking rate LSU. Now, if you purely work on stocking rate of government LSU and you keep your animals constantly on the same land, you can just imagine the damage that's going to happen because there's no resting periods. And if you look at NDVI, nature actually gives you those spikes for free, and we don't stock and destock according to that. So a lot of people normally think that stocking rate is a carrying capacity that you have for 12 months of the year. It actually is just an average, and it is quite accurate. And it's just a question of where do you really destock and how do you use what nature is giving you for free instead of starting to feed them in certain times of the year, or to destock earlier maybe in the time of the year to actually carry your animals throughout the drought. These are all questions, and these are all things that we started seeing when we started measuring NDVI levels. Again, just it's actual LSUs, the cost of LSUs measured against rainfall and cover. This is quite interesting. Another little video where I've mentioned to you earlier in those horse paddocks that we use a little implement, plow, and that is how it operates. It's very simple. It's a little hopploegie, we call it a hopploeg, and all it does, it creates these ponds. I'll show it to you again. It creates these ponds. We go after that and we cover that with acacia trees. You can see all the acacia standing around here. We cut these branches, we cover it, and this is the effect that you get. Not even 4 months after that exercise. Another tool that we're applying is using cyber trackers with the herders. We can track exactly where they are, how long they've been in an area, and then overlay this on our grazing map. So the grids that you also see on these maps represents the imaginary camps, the property. So you can really see where we've done our work. This is nice to really overlay on your plans and correlate that to your stock days and what you planned and what your actuals are that you took off the land. So another picture of which we took with the drone, and that's just kraal sites over time. And you can also see the difference in the change in felt, from going from sour felt to a sweet felt with those kraals. You can see sort of here on the left-hand center part of this picture, you can see the crawling areas, and it's a totally different vegetation and increase in diversity of species. It's very interesting. This is another very old rock hole that we talk about, the bare spot, and that circle inside there. This was purely only one big old bale that we put down here. The animals trampled it, and that was the effect that we had. Very interesting. So this is the best part of it. We get to our grazing planning, and we literally sit down as a team in the field, and we discuss every camp. What I normally do is I print out a zero map of a 250 hectare piece of land. Then you start drawing in your water points and all your crucial areas which you want to work on with the animals. You move them into those areas. If there's all sorts of challenges, if there's a bird species that's breeding that time of the year, you don't bring that camp into your planning. If it's full moon and you struggle with predators certain places of the farm, certain times of the year, you just plan around that. If there's camps that hasn't got water in certain times of the year, you plan around that. It gives you the versatility to really plan for biodiversity, plan for species, plan for, even if you want to keep some of the areas for seeding or whatever purpose it may be. You can really, it's such a handy tool to really help you plan around these things. We even plan our leave, we plan you know, who's on, who's off, what time of the month they're in and out. It's just crazy whatever you can put on this grazing plan. It becomes quite an interesting document if you get into it. But yeah, it's always good to have it as a team exercise. Education and social development, crucial for us. This is just part of what we do. We do training right from the children's age all the way through. This is Gavin here. He's doing training in Babanango at the moment in KwaZulu-Natal. Very important to us, and that's the way that we see adding value and sharing our knowledge and sharing the experiences with other people. So what is currently happening on the property? Got about 25% more cover, which is a massive saving in feed bills, especially in the drought. Having healthy plants for longer, converting plants into product and cash, not doing different things, but doing things differently. And that is sort of what I explained to you with the feeding and the feeding bins. That you still feed, but if you do it differently and if you apply things a bit differently and using the understanding of the principles, you get an absolutely amazing effect. Yeah, increasing biodiversity, increase soil organic matter and soil life. We got an increase in water retention, animal production increased. We had less erosion, a lot more. You know, one of the things that we really realized is that the springs just ran for a lot longer. The better the cover we had, the longer periods of time the springs ran, and they were much cleaner than they used to be. Increase in carrying capacity, increase in bird species, increase in insect species, plant species, the better understanding of nature's ability to mitigate the risk. These are things that we didn't really knew, but when we got through the drought, we started comparing ourselves to conventional farmers. We realized that we're in a fortunate position of having better felt. We could carry our animals for a lot longer. Our animals were healthier. So definitely increasing biodiversity definitely saw us through the drought. So what we're trying to do is, you know, definitely looking at the water cycle, mineral cycle, biodiversity, energy flow. And this wind pump is really to give you an overall idea of how you can add value from solar conversion, adding rain, adding felt, adding infrastructure, herders, whatever it may be, adding then animals and human capital on top of that really drives this whole process. Your ecological cycles really determines the direction that you're going in. So what you're trying to do is to really measure your ecological processes. We do that through EOV process, which we've just started doing recently, having amazing results. So the ecological outcome verification, where you measure the trends of your ecological processes, is quite interesting. And I can share that, I mean, at the later stage with you guys, is how we actually do that. It's a practical and scalable method developed by the Savory Institute and being applied at the scale globally. It's currently applied to livestock, pastoral mixed production systems, qualified land regeneration. It cannot be used to support, so develop. And it's the Savory Institute professionals and scientists that really developed the program. It's unique in many aspects: design, scalability, outcome-based, and the quality assurance on the ground. What I really like about the EOV, it is outcome-based. It's really simple to use. I was previously from the wine industry, and the amount of paperwork and admin you normally have for certification processes is imaginable. And as farmers, we don't like paperwork at all. So this really came as a surprise. It's very relevant. It is adapted all over the world. It's non-punitive, creates a total learning community. It's beyond soil carbon. It includes all ecosystem processes. And that is what the real value is for me, is to really be able to have a tool where we can really measure the ecological processes, something that we haven't thought of doing before, but also which makes it quite traceable. So yes, it's scientifically accepted, requires really minimal effort, like I said before, and you really get it in many countries throughout the world that's applying it at the moment. And the reality is that the consumer really demands it. So whatever product, if it is wildlife, if it's meat, whatever the product is that you really produce, the consumer is really now starting to ask for climate change, or for transparency, for traceability. What does the farmers actually do on the ground? It's becoming more and more evident that we've got to comply to certain environmental standards. So to sum it up, this is where we're getting at. My wind pump, it's really working nicely, and it's generating a lot of energy there. And I often say to people, the more energy you put into this, it's solar conversion, rain, felt, infrastructure, animals, human capital, and the more effort you put into that, the more efficient and the more successful your business model becomes. If you collect the information, if you're innovative and apply these principles and apply the different tools. I've just shared a few tools with you. There's really, every farmer, every landowner, every person has tools. If it's water, if it's fences, if it's feed, whatever equipment, if it's animals, different kind of animals. If you start understanding how to apply that in your context, that really, and you add a bit of innovation to that, the effect and the change is quite significant. It's interesting because nature, we understand and we know that nature is very complex, and the only way we can really manage complexities is to understand the basic principles, the basic functions of the ecological systems, how they function, and start measuring it. And as soon as you start measuring it, and as soon as you start monitoring it, you're starting to see results and applying. So that thing turns properly. The water cycle, mineral cycle, biodiversity, energy flow really determines the direction and how successful you are. And then, yes, and that is how we prefer to see the regenerating or the regeneration of landscapes and livelihoods.
This was an incredible talk, and for me, one of the most interesting was about the locusts. That's something I just had no idea about and have been questioning and wanting to know more. So I definitely will have more questions for you on that. But Alex, I'm going to ask you to unmute because you've got a couple of questions in the chat that you can ask directly.
100%. Give me 2 seconds. I just need to park. Sorry.
Okay, that's good. No worries at all.
Okay, there we go. Oh no, I can't remember what I even asked now. So question 1 was,
I can read it out to you, Alex.
No, I got it. Don't worry. Thank you. would the constant moving of water points and such also reduce the parasites severity? I ask because I assume the movement would disrupt life cycles of both endo and ectoparasites.
No, definitely. You know, it's interesting because it's I can't say to you definitely because we don't have problems like that. You know, and I think the reason we don't have problems like that is because we're constantly moving animals to new grazing areas.
100%.
But you know, I haven't really gone into detail of the herding and the herding effect and the role that the herders play, because it's very important, especially from that point of view where you don't have to treat 1,000 head of animal at a time. The guys stay with those animals. They really start knowing each individual animal. So as an animal shows any sign of disease or anything, it gets treated right there. So normally, conventionally, people will wait till there's a whole lot of them sick, and then you'll dose the whole bloody lot, which just doesn't make sense, you know. So those are one of the things we take samples often, you know, dung samples, analyze it, but we very seldom have any problems with it.
Okay. Perfect, thanks. And then the second question, sorry, I just need to get there. Is this method applicable to other vegetation types, or is the moral of the story to farm your veld and adapt as needed?
Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So your veld will really determine. Look, I mean, it depends on where you are, but the principle stays the same. The effect is necessary. Doesn't matter where you are. The only difference is it will be determined by time control. So what kind of veld? So obviously you'll have longer grazing periods in KwaZulu-Natal where you have as what you've got in Namakwa, for instance. You'll probably use different animals as well, but the principle is very much the same. The time frame will differ from area to area, rainfall to rainfall, you know, carrying capacity and veld type. If you know. The interesting thing is, and we often talk about this, it's if you look at the renoster veld, for instance, or you go to gurries, which actually means grass, or a rogge veld. You know, the rogge veld used to be rye grass, not driven. So was it human influence that caused it to go into succulent, or was succulent just the only thing that really survived? So these are all questions that you've got to ask yourself, because it used to be grassland. So was it a consequence? But yes, we've seen that you can sort of influence veld types through grazing.
Okay.
But it really you need to sort of picture your own landscape, decide how you're going to use your tool.
Sure. So it would impact stuff like your increase or decrease the species and so on, and just your choices would be influenced by what you look at in terms of nutritional value of your veld and what you want over a long term. Is that more or less correct? Yep.
Sometimes it can be determined through a species you want to protect. You know, if you for instance want to protect speckworm, and we all know that speckworm is just part of a bigger ecosystem, that it doesn't help you've got only speckworm, because you only sit with a monoculture and you've got consequences on that as well. So having an increased diversity, I think is something for me personally on the property which is my target. I don't want one species of specific one thing. Because we really saw that the diversity of species carries you through droughts. It mitigates you against risk of locusts or fire risk and all sorts of risks. So diversity is really first prize.
Perfect. And then last question, if you don't mind, I might have missed it. With regards to your mobile camps, how do they work? How do you set them up? Are they electrified? Could they be electrified? Or just, if you go into some detail, I'd appreciate it.
You're talking about the camps or the kraals?
The kraals themselves, sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no, so the kraals is very easy. We started off with having electric netting, and the net, they didn't last very long. So especially in bad weather and those things, the sheep started and the animals starts pushing against it, and they break it and they just run off. But the interesting thing with that is, so we use normal metal little gates which we put together. It's very easy to use. It's very easy to transport. It's rugged. The animals don't push it. What does happen with us in very heavy rain and heavy weather, that then we open it up, so the animals can go into the veld. They can look for protection, you know, because
Sure.
otherwise they'll just trample itself. So those are some of the expensive lessons that we've learned. But you know what, the next day the dog goes out and the guy goes and he collects all the sheep, because they never far from you and they don't wander
Sure.
off, except if you see. You know, that's another thing that because we our herders, they really prefer what they do. And I must just make a comment here that my herders are some of the highest paid guys on the land. And I made that decision very consciously, because they determine your carrying capacity. They determine biodiversity and the value of your veld, really. So it's very important that you really look after your herders. And because they work 24 hours, we don't have predator problems. We don't know losses of animals, you know. They really look after the quality of your land. They really look after the quality of your animals. And if you really look at the financial model, that it makes a lot more sense than conventional, where people's got to go out and do maintenance every day, look at the animals. You know, you don't know your animals that well. You don't know your veld that well because you don't live there. So there's a lot of advantages in the model, especially on open land where you don't have any fences.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think you touched on a really important thing of the people that are out there are the ones we need to be taking care of as farmers, as employers. At the end of the day, they're the key holders essentially to the farm success. So that's awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was some very good questions there, Alex. Johan, we have another one in the chat asking if the same sort of testing has been done on sweet veld, or experiments done on sweet veld as well.
Sorry, who's asking the question?
It is Crystal Krill. Let me see if I can unmute her.
No, if it doesn't, Holly, it doesn't matter. I think the question is, yes. I mean, obviously you've got to look at your veld and the impact of your animals on that veld. You need to understand. You need to understand what the impact is. You know, sweet veld, meaning Karoo sweet veld or any other veld, it gets hammered firstly by all animals. So the problem that you have with sweet veld, it's also your most nutritious veld, and your animals in the dry seasons tend to congregate on that areas. And those are the areas that historically has first been overgrazed and went bare, and we have a lot of erosion and things. So keeping animals away from that, where in reserves and places where you don't have fences, is quite a challenge. So there you've got to look at destocking programs. You know, you need to get in there, either sell animals, either cull them, or move them to another area if you can. What we saw is when you move in there with a flock of sheep normally and you trample them, it tends to push the wildlife out there for a few months until it has rained and until it's recovered, and then the wildlife will move back onto that. But again, you still need to look at your wildlife numbers. So if you do your stocking rates, got to look at the stocking rates of your wildlife as well as your domestic animals, because you can easily be overstocked on both sides. And then look at the purpose and how you want to apply either wildlife or livestock to get what you want. Because at the moment, sweet veld is in the Karoo is you know, if you look at the cover, it's very, very badly covered because it's so under pressure. We know that the only solution to that is to really have the herd effect and trampling effect on that, to mulch it, to cover it. To just grow one plant per square meter extra makes a massive difference. That's really what your focus needs to be, instead of trying to go and buy feed for animals. If you can create one more plant per square meter, you know that you're looking at a whole chain of reactions. So yeah, sweet veld is difficult to manage.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and just a question from me, because I know we've probably got about 4 or 5 different African countries represented in the room today. And I know a lot of people will have heard of the Alan Savory Institute.
Yes. Yes.
What is the link between that and your practices and what you're doing at the Herding Academy?
So Alan is probably one of the main reasons, and I specifically didn't give reference to anyone for the talk, because it would have kept me busy for another half an hour probably, because there's so many people in my life that's really had an influence, and Alan is one of them. So if it wasn't for Alan, I really wouldn't have understand the processes and the effect that the herd effect and everything that I know today. I mean, the whole planning of and holistic planning of where everything really gets together was because of Alan, and Alan's been an absolutely amazing ambassador to our project. So what we've done is we've added in our Herding Academy, the learning program, we've added a whole lot of other stuff in that as well. So plant grazing is holistic plant grazing is really what we focus on. But then we bring in all sorts of social aspects. We bring in economics. We bring in personal development, all different topics. Yeah, leadership training. Yeah. So no, it's this is very much based on Alan's principles. But also saying that, on the other hand, is one of the properties that we acquired was for many decades was run on the John Aycock's model, and absolutely phenomenal felt that we inherited from that part of the farm. But we all know that with the Aycock's system, it was quite a rigid system, and it was very specifically there to create grass instead of felt. When we got involved there, I said, listen guys, I'm much more in favor of a diversity of species, especially for climate mitigation. And I started implementing more of a holistic approach, more of Alan's principles into that, to create more of a diversity. And really, like I said right in the beginning, is to picture your landscape and then make your decisions according to that, instead of having a 14-day in and 180-day out, very rigid systems. So it gives us a lot more flexibility. But yes, we're very closely related to Alan and Alan Savory, and it's been an interesting journey with him.
Hey, and I've just unmuted Dr. Tadeo from Uganda, who has 2 questions for you, and I think these are the final 2 questions that we have. He wants to know if holistic management approaches incorporate environmental conservation principles, which I think you did answer. Well, you did.
Yes.
Through the
Yes, we do that. For us, it's very much about conservation. So our context is conservation. But again, if your context is chicken farm and chicken production, then you've got to apply those principles to that as well. It doesn't really matter what you farm with. If you farm with land and plants and sun and rain, then those principles apply. So holistic management, the problem, I think a lot of people understand holistic management, doesn't understand it very well. Because holism really means taking everything into account. It's not a recipe, it's not a model, it's definitely not a system. So as soon as you think it's a system that you can apply, you're wrong, because it only give you access to certain tools that you can use in your decision-making framework. So whatever you farm with, on whatever land it is, got to apply those principles within your decision-making framework. That's really holistic management.
Okay, and finally, the last question before we do have a short poll, but I think just to ask, do you think there's been huge community empowerment in looking after the land? Do you feel that they've really taken up the challenge and are amazed about what they're seeing as well?
Unfortunately, not from communities itself, but there's a massive drive from NGOs that is doing work in communities. And I don't yet know if it's good or bad. I think it's probably good, because we do a lot of training and we're really trying to change people's mindsets. But we've done a lot of training on land managers and herders itself, and we soon realized that it's absolutely worthless if you do not influence the decision makers. So we're really trying to get landowners, managers, community leaders involved, and really decision makers on executive levels, because that's really where you make the big influence, and that is really where these principles gets influenced into policies, start becoming like the wool MOES standard, like the wool standard. Those things are being written into those policies, and that is really what's making the difference currently. But it's difficult in the rural areas, because there's just, at the moment, there's just not enough trainers. There's not enough people really to go out there and train in their communities. That could be champions that can work there and really can help people with grazing plans, that can help them implement, can help them, and that's where the NGOs currently is playing quite a role. And there's quite a bit of funding coming in, especially carbon-driven funding for those projects. So yes, I think things are changing fast. I think it's just a question of time, and we've got to pull our finger this side just to start training people and spreading the word.
Cool. Well, thank you, Johan. We've had really great feedback from everybody in the chat. Also to know that Johan is talking again on Unlocking Nature. So please do sign up for that. Our Unlocking Natures are every Thursday evening. So Johan, once again, thank you very, very much indeed. A fascinating talk.